Today we're going to be talking about cells. So grab your notebook, something to write with, a pen or a pencil. We are going to be doing some sketching today, so I do recommend that you have something that you can erase. But if you have a printer, you can also print off the images that I'm going to be using today, and you can write directly onto those. So when taking notes, it's important that we start with a title. Today we're going to be talking about cells, so go ahead and add the title cells to your page. And remember, you should be writing exactly what I am writing at a minimum. It's always okay for you to add some extra things, but at a very minimum, you should have exactly what I have on my page on your page. That's going to be the minimum that you are required to know. Okay, let's talk cell theory. Cell theory has some rules. So first of all living things are made of cells. That's going to be rule number one. If it is alive, if it is living, if it was living in the past and is now dead, it is made of cells, or at least one cell. Rule number two, cells come from other cells. So we call this process cell division. And there are a few theories about how we came up with the first cells, but for now, we know that there are cells, and all new cells are going to come from existing cells when those existing cells divide. All right, rule number three, all cells are made of structures that allow the cell to function. Some of those structures are going to be found in all cells, and other structures are going to be only found in plant cells or only found in animal cells. So now we're going to talk about a couple of different types of cell. The first type of cell that we're going to be talking about are called prokaryotes. Pro means before and karyo means egg. So when scientists first looked at cells, what they noticed is that some of the cells look like eggs. You know how you have like the white and then there's the yolk in the middle when you cook like an over easy egg? Well, that's what the cells that they could see look like. And so they named those cells and they started discussing those cells, but then they found some other cells, and those other cells were quite a bit smaller and they didn't have that egg-like structure. So they named those cells the before egg cells, or the prokaryotes. There are some key things for you to know about prokaryotes. First, they don't have any membrane-bound organelles. So some of you have heard this cell wrap. It goes, cells, they're made of organelles. Well, prokaryotes don't have the organelles that they talk about in that cell wrap. Most importantly, in terms of identifying prokaryotes, they don't have a nucleus. So that's one of those membrane-bound organelles, and prokaryotes don't have it, so they don't have a nucleus. Another thing about prokaryotes is that they're unicellular, and this means that they're made of only one cell. You are multicellular because your body is made up of a bunch of different cells that are all working together. Well, prokaryotes are tiny, and one of the reasons why is because they're made of only one cell. Finally, prokaryotes have two types of DNA. They have chromosomal DNA, which is the DNA that controls how they function, and it's required for their lives. Unlike your chromosomal DNA, their chromosomal DNA is found in one big circle. Now, your chromosomal DNA is often found in those X's that you'll see if you were to Google what does a chromosome look like. So, they have chromosomal DNA, but they also have another type of DNA called plasmid DNA. And plasmid DNA is super cool because it's extra. They don't need it to survive. And so it does have genes, and those genes can give the prokaryotes traits. And the crazy thing is that things like bacteria can actually trade these extra pieces of plasmid DNA, which means that they can change their traits or their characteristics by getting new genes on plasmid DNA. Okay, take a minute to draw this basic prokaryotic cell. Now that you've done that, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to label this in this cell the chromosomal DNA. Notice that it's just one big tangled circle. Your chromosomal DNA is in those X's, like I said earlier, but you have chromosomal DNA and prokaryotes have chromosomal DNA. The next thing that we're going to label are these little circles of DNA, and those are the plasmid DNA. So that's the extra genes that a prokaryote might have. These dots represent ribosomes, and ribosomes are made of amino acids and nucleic acids, and they're really small, but their job is super important because their job is to make all of the proteins that cells need in order to function. Next, we have the cell membrane. Notice that around this cell there are two layers. The inside layer is the cell membrane. The cell membrane controls what molecules can go into and out of this cell. Surrounding the cell membrane is the cell wall. The cell wall is going to provide structure and support to the cell. In bacteria, the cell wall is made out of an amino acid and carbohydrate complex that's called peptidoglycan. And that is going to be making that support of the cell so that the cell can maintain its shape and its size. Next, we have the cytoplasm. The cytoplasm is a gel-like fluid that everything in the cell floats in. There is a flagella. Now the flagella is this whip-like structure that provides for movement for the cell. Some prokaryotes have a flagella, some don't. Some can have multiple flagella. That's one of the things that's kind of optional for this cell. All right, the last thing on this is you'll notice that I've put stars in front of some of these cell structures. The stars represent components that are found in all cells. So all cells have a cell membrane, so the cell membrane has a star in front of it. Go ahead and add those stars, and then we're going to move on to the next page. I'm moving to the next page, and I recommend that you do too so that we can keep your notes nice and organized. All right, the next category of cell that we're going to talk about are called eukaryotes. Eu means true, karyo still refers to eggs. So these are the cells that look like eggs. So they call them true eggs or eukaryotes. They look like they have that yolk in the middle, and that yolk is a nucleus. So first thing about eukaryotes, they have membrane-bound organelles. And the most important one in terms of identification is that nucleus. Eukaryotes can be unicellular, like algae, so made of one cell, or multicellular, like you. We're going to start with an example of a plant cell, so take a minute to sketch this cell in your notebook. Now that you have that, let's go ahead and do some labeling. First, this big circle thing in the middle of the cell, that is called the vacuole. The vacuole is a membrane-bound organelle that is a sac, and this can be one sac, or they can also have multiple vacuoles or multiple sacs. Inside of the sac are water and nutrients, and the cell is going to use this as sort of a supply. Plants in particular are going to have these really big vacuoles where they can store water and nutrients in case of, say, a drought. They have no idea when it's going to rain next, so they need to be able to store extra water. Now, you'll notice that I put a plus sign in front of the vacuole title, and that is because anything with a plus sign is a membrane-bound organelle. So these are going to be things that are only found in eukaryotes and not found in prokaryotes. All right, next we have the nucleus, and the nucleus contains the DNA. So go ahead and add some DNA. The DNA is not circular, but it is long and stringy. The dots are still ribosomes, and because we wrote their function on the previous page, we are not going to add the function again here. All right, surrounding the cell is the cell wall. Now, plant cell walls have the same function as prokaryotic cell walls. They're still going to provide support and structure to the cell, but they're made of slightly different molecules. So plant cell walls are made of carbohydrates called cellulose. Next, we have the cell membrane. Inside of plant cells, there's also a bunch of these oval things that represent chloroplasts. The chloroplasts are responsible for performing photosynthesis. Chloroplasts get 2 pluses in front of them because they're actually surrounded by 2 membranes. The next thing is a mitochondria. Now, mitochondria perform cellular respiration, which is the process that cells use to get energy. Mitochondria also have 2 pluses in front of them because they also are surrounded by 2 membranes, and this is actually super cool. Scientists think that mitochondria and chloroplasts were actually their own unicellular organisms back in the day. But what happened is a bigger organism came and engulfed them. So it basically takes its cell membrane and it wraps it around the mitochondria or the chloroplast and pulls it inside of that cell. And that's going to make it so that those bigger cells are able to get energy better, and they are going to be able to outcompete those big cells that didn't encapsulate or engulf a mitochondria or a chloroplast. But as a result, the mitochondria and chloroplasts are going to be bound by 2 membranes. They're going to have 2 membranes around them. And adding to support to this theory is the fact that chloroplasts and mitochondria actually have their own DNA, and that DNA is separate from the DNA of the cell. Okay, back to our plant cell. It also has cytoplasm, and remember that cytoplasm is one of the components that is found in all cells. And lastly, I forgot to do this in my notes, but go ahead and add a plus sign next to the nucleus, because the nucleus is also a membrane-bound organelle. Okay, go ahead and turn the page. This is going to be your final page of notes for today. Another type of eukaryotic cell is an animal cell. So our original question for this unit is about plant cells versus animal cells, which is why we're using plant and animal cells in our examples today. Take a minute to draw a sketch of this animal cell. Now that you have that, this is going to go pretty fast. Let's start with the cell membrane. Notice that animal cells do not have a cell wall. Next, we have the nucleus. Go ahead and add in that DNA. And then we have some ribosomes, and we also have mitochondria. Notice that animal cells do not have chloroplasts because they do not perform photosynthesis. Photosynthesis is a plant thing. Okay, animal cells do have cytoplasm, and they can even have some small vacuoles. So go ahead and draw in a couple of small vacuoles on your cell. All right, that's it. That was a lot of information, and it would be wise for you to go ahead and make a comparison chart or a Venn diagram to show which components are found in all cells, which are in plants, which are in animals, and which are in prokaryotic cells, so that you can do some comparing and contrasting for this.